Ha tirato poi l'ha presa in faccia.
Enrico, ti piace il sesso? No, tu sei chiuso a me, tu sei Rodrigo. No, Enrico è Iago.
Okay, can you see this? So, this is page 19 in your edition. So the speech that we're going to look at here is page 19 in your edition. Obviously, what I'm not expecting you to do is just read these shoddy biro annotations. What's wrong? It's recorded. I've got all of whatever you just said in Italian was on my video.
No, really?
Yep. So.
He's going to translate it.
I did a very brief recap of what happened till now.
Fantastic. I hope that's what that is, but I'm fairly sure it's not.
No, it is.
It is? Okay, that's fine. I don't care what language it's in. As long as it's about Othello, it's fine. So, this opening speech, one of the things that we want to pay attention to is this language that Othello uses that reveals his commitment to these abstractions and to these ideas that we've kind of focused on in this opening scene. I'm trying to work out how to move this because I'm spatially a little bit special needs. Okay, so his opening lines: most potent, grave, and reverend signors, my very noble and approved good masters. Already in those opening lines, you can hear the type of rhetoric that this character is going to become associated with. The first thing that you can see in these words here, potent, grave, and reverend, this triplet of adjectives that are based on an adherence to hierarchy. His immediate opening line is to give us this sense of adherence and respect for this rigid hierarchy that he finds himself within, and that he is valued within this hierarchy. You know, he has a fairly integral role, a fairly powerful role. But in these opening lines, he's got this kind of, it's a little bit excessive, potent, grave, and reverend, powerful, serious, and highly revered, highly respected. All of these adjectives give us this sense of his commitment to those sorts of abstractions and that type of hierarchy that he has benefited from and that governs the city of Venice. My very noble and approved good masters. Now, this is a rhetorical device that sounds like something very fancy and is actually really basic. It's called hendiadys, because you can see in this annotation here, number 2, hendiadys. These are, again, abstractions. The idea of nobility and approval is what he is locating in this court full of the nobility of Venice that he is addressing. So within the space of 2 lines, we've had 5 verbal choices that reflect intellectual abstractions that support the idea of hierarchy. And that's one of the central things that you see in the opening of this. Hendiadys is simply where you try and describe something with an adjective and one won't do, and you use the word and put another one after it. So noble and approved good masters. The key feature is that you tend to be going after the same idea. Nobility and approval are related ideas. So when the sense that this gives is that you are being profuse, in this case with praise, that the single verbal construction doesn't quite carry the weight that it would need to.
It's like saying like so great.
Yeah, it's an intensification really of praise in this line. Yeah, he's being repetitive. So if you think of, you know, what this sounds like, if someone uses 5 positive words in the space of 2 lines to talk about you, it comes across precisely in the way that Yago mentions in the first scene, of obsequious, knee-crooking knaves, of ass-kissers, basically, of people that adhere to hierarchy and overly respect the people above them in that particular social organization. He says that I have taken away this old man's daughter. It is most true. True, I have married her. One of the key features that you'll notice in this speech is the technical features of ancient rhetoric, which is all these weird words that seem to be ending with lots of S's in them, like hendiadys and anadiplosis. These are rhetorical features, and these are features of the language that would be intensely kind of taught in grammar schools, like the sort that Shakespeare went to. So you would have to learn these tropes off by heart. And what this is warning us is that Othello's language is highly, highly crafted. He has very deliberate rhetoric that's carefully structured in order to have an effect. So in this particular construction, it is most true. True, I have married her. Anadiplosis is simply where you end a clause and begin the next one with the same word or phrase. So it is most true, true I have married her. That is a classical rhetorical trope. But the key thing to notice here is how many of them there are. So these lines here, it is most true, true I have married her. Anadiplosis, this annotation here. It's crafted reason, and it is explaining cause and effect. So the accusation that he's trying to defend himself from in these lines is that he is seduced her by witchcraft, that he seduced her by magic, and that because he's black, there's no way that she would have agreed to marry him unless he played some kind of trick on her. The trick that we realize that he's played on her is his crafted rhetoric, his crafted language. He says, it is most true. True I have married her. The very head and front of my offending hath this extent no more. I.e., the only thing that I have done that is offensive is simply to marry this girl. Rude am I in my speech. And this is one of these moments where you can see that he's internalized the social norms of this place and its prejudices. He has decided that his speech is crude and uncrafted and kind of primitive, which is plainly, we can tell from these opening lines, not true. He is in rigid blank verse. He is being self-deprecating in a way that you have to decide. Do you think he is deliberately self-deprecating in order to gain his own kind of motivations that he's seeking to fulfill? Or is he self-deprecating because he has genuinely internalized the racial hostility of this place in which he is supposedly valued? Rude am I in my speech and little blessed with the soft phrase of peace. So immediately we've got this self-deprecating comment followed by sibilance, a poetic device that recreates the effect that he's talking about, the soft, I'm little blessed with a soft phrase of peace. He's very deliberately using poetic language to emphasize the point that he's communicating, which goes to construct a type of irony where quite clearly he isn't rude in speech. If you speak in fully formed blank verse with poetic devices, that's the opposite of rude and crude. For since these arms of mine had 7 years' pith, till now some 9 moons wasted, they have used their dearest action in the tented field. So this is his explanation for why his speech is so supposedly crude and rough around the edges. Because these arms of mine had 7 years' pith, so since I was 7 years old, these arms of mine, these bodily devices that become the symbol of my identity, had 7 years' meat on them. So since I was a small child, basically, till some 9 moons wasted, till this particular period of my life in middle age, they have used their dearest action in the tented field. They have been accustomed to war. This is the phrase that he is trying to use to convince us. But these arms of mine, and this annotation here, again, it's synecdoche. It's that rhetorical trope where a part stands for the whole. So his arms become a representative of him. And again, there is this connotation of it being kind of dehumanizing in some way, and I think a restriction of his entire being down to its functionality. Since these arms of mine had 7 years' pith is a very unusual way of invoking your entire identity, and it shows us that the way that he understands himself and the way that he sees his value in this society is through his military role and his commitment to fighting. So these arms of mine had 7 years' pith, their dearest action in the tented field, and this again is a metonym. The tented field becomes a metonymical representation of war. I have used my arms only for fighting. And that is why my speech is crude, because I am a soldier. I'm not a politician or a diplomat or a courtier. Of course, what we realize here is that he is a very powerful orator and that he does have highly crafted rhetoric that is capable of persuading people. And little of this great world can I speak more than pertains to feats of broil and battle. Again, little of this world am I able to articulate other than what relates to fighting. To conflict and fighting. But, again, plosive alliteration in this line, pertains to feats of broil and battle. These lines are littered with kind of sound devices, and they're also extremely heavily iambic pentameter. That rhythm that pertains to feats of broil and battle is really strict iambic pentameter. So he's speaking in this kind of heroic blank verse in this particular line that gives us this elevated sense of his rhetoric. And therefore little shall I grace my cause in speaking for myself. Again, there's this self-effacing humor. I won't be able to advance my cause in speaking for myself because the way that I speak is uncivilized and barbaric because I'm a black man. That is his way of actually almost adhering to the social prejudices by which they understand him and adopting this kind of self-effacing position in order to show that he is not kind of in conflict with those in power in Venice, that he wants them on his side. Yet by your gracious patience, I will a round, unvarnished tale deliver of my whole course of love. So if you're patient, I will tell you the story in plain and frank language of how Desdemona came to be attracted to me. But the fact that he knows this, the fact that he uses this kind of ambiguous metaphor here, he is aware of his oratorical powers. That's what it says here. He uses this metaphor of varnishing something, of polishing some kind of artifact to describe and make sense of his own rhetoric, of his language. So this unvarnished tale, although he is proclaiming to do the opposite, he's actually carrying out precisely what he's not promising to do. He's promising an unvarnished tale, and we're yet analysing what he's saying in an English class. So we know that there's an awful lot of kind of figurative language and rhetorical construction and poetic and sound devices littering this speech in which he professes the crudeness of his language. So there is a kind of central irony at play there in the way that he delivers his lines. He begins in this sort of rhetorical component of this speech. Of my whole course of love, what drugs, what charms, what conjuration, and what mighty magic. Those phrases there are, again, borrowing anaphora. He refutes the accusation leveled by Brabantio using this rhetorical device. He uses this series of questions. What drugs, what charms, what conjuration, and what mighty magic? He's directly addressing Brabantio's accusations here. Brabantio has accused him of carrying out some kind of witchcraft. You know, oh, you must have carried out some form of witchcraft because you are black and otherwise she wouldn't be attracted to you. Now he is actually using this language in order to take apart the argument. So he borrows these supernatural images and using this rhetorical trope of anaphora begins to throw back the accusation towards Brabantio. What drugs, what charms, what conjuration, and what mighty magic. I'm about to explain all of these accusations to you. We flip over. For such proceedings, I am charged withal, I won his daughter. So that is, in this opening section, what you can see is this huge commitment to adhering to hierarchy and using highly crafted rhetorical language to make sense of his position in this interaction. So Othello's language is precisely the opposite of what he claims it to be. He claims that it is this rude, crude, kind of barbaric language of a weathered and experienced soldier. And actually what you'll find is when you read Othello's lines, they are the lines with kind of poetic majesty. They're the lines with the kind of the most obviously musical qualities. Iago's are the ones with the complex intellectual constructions, but depicted in very rough kind of prose. So Yago doesn't often speak in blank verse. Othello constantly speaks in blank verse, the unrhymed iambic pentameter. And here is where he carries on his story. Her father loved me, oft invited me, still questioned me, the story of my life from year to year, the battles, sieges, fortunes that I have passed. So, again, this opening little construction uses a classical rhetorical trope called epistrophe, which is where you use, like anaphora, but the opposite. You use the same word at the end of a clause rather than at the beginning, and you keep repeating it. Her father loved me, oft invited me, still questioned me, the story of my life from year to year. That epistrophe is, again, telling us this is carefully constructed rhetoric and that he is skilled in the production of this type of language. But what it's also is emphasizing, you know, his own attention, that the emphasis is on his attention, that Brabantio has actively invited Othello round to his house to hear these stories, and that his attraction to Desdemona is an incidental quality of Othello just telling him all of his heroics in battle. He says, from year to year, the battle, sieges, and fortunes that I have passed is this kind of listing of his military experiences that gives us the sense of his bravado as a soldier. And this is something that he develops throughout these speeches. I ran it through, even from my boyish days, to the very moment that he bade me tell it. So I went right from the beginning. What we've got here is someone who obviously likes to talk about their military conquests. I talked about it right from the beginning of when I was a little boy, 7 years pith on those arms, all the way to, my middle age. And it's worth remembering that he is middle-aged. He's not a young man. And that's part of the reason why Iago is able to inspire this sense of jealousy and paranoia in him about Desdemona. Wherein I spake of most disastrous chances, of moving accidents by flood and field, of hairbreadth escapes in the imminent deadly breach, of being taken by the insolent foe. This anaphora that he keeps using here, of moving incidents, of hairbreadth, of being taken by the insolent foe, all of these these examples of anaphora are trying to build up a sense of excitement about all of his military experiences, of moving accidents by flood and field, of shifting, dynamic, unstable events on the battlefield and at sea, of hairbreadth escapes in the imminent deadly breach, of escaping just before the fortress's walls are kind of violated, of being taken by the insolent foe and sold to slavery. So Othello in his childhood is captured by the enemy and sold to slavery. He redeems himself, he frees himself from this, of my redemption thence, and portrants in my travels history, wherein of Antre's vast and desert's idle. Antre's vast and desert's idle are big caves and empty deserts. So he deliberately evokes this type of exotic imagery that makes his conquests sound kind of magical and beyond the bounds of normal Western experience. Rough quarries, rocks and hills whose heads touch heaven. It was my hint to speak. Such was the process. So he uses this exotic image first of all, and then within this little construction here, rough quarries, rocks and hills whose heads touch heaven. He uses both an alliteration, that kind of breathy alliteration of the H sound, of hills whose heads touch heaven, and personification to describe the landscapes in which he finds himself battling. We've got here someone where the landscape is kind of almost coming alive in its dynamism, and it's threatening him in that particular linguistic formation. These lines here are the ones that are most important in showing us his consciousness of his own linguistic power. It was my hint to speak, and the word hint here, and this is part of the reason why that edition that you guys have is so rubbish, because it doesn't have the glosses of these types of words. Hint can mean your moment to speak, your turn to speak, but it can also mean that you're being called upon by someone else. So it means both his chance, his opportunity to speak of his battles, but also the way in which he is called upon by someone else to speak of his battles. So there's an uncertainty, a kind of ambiguity about why he's talking here. I'm talking both because it's my opportunity to seduce Desdemona and because Brabantio has actually requested this from me. He's asked me to speak in this way. Such was the process. Now, the word process itself is a kind of technical term from formal rhetoric. So he's actually using the language of rhetoric deliberately in telling this story. And processes means, the narrative construction in rhetorical language. So this is what he's doing here. He's actually reflecting on his own rhetoric. It's kind of metatextual reflection again, where he shows his understanding of these formal rhetorical processes and the fact that he is structuring his language quite deliberately for it to sound exciting and for it to sound kind of powerful. And he knows that that's what's going to seduce Desdemona. So there is a deliberate awareness, I think, of his own linguistic power here. And then you can tell by the subjects that follow that he's aware of the excitement of what he says, and of the cannibals that each other eat, the anthropophagi, and men whose heads do grow beneath their shoulders. This to hear would Desdemona seriously incline. But still the house affairs would draw her thence, whichever as she could with haste dispatch she'd come again, and with a greedy ear devour up my discourse. So even though she is torn away from his ridiculous stories of cannibals and anthropophagi, which is basically the same as cannibals, it means eating people, she is torn away from these. She would be seriously inclined towards these exotic stories of heroism. But still the house affairs would draw her from thence. So her own affairs of life and business would take her away from these stories. But whichever as she could with haste dispatch, she'd come again. So she would get rid of these jobs very quickly and return, and with a greedy ear devour up my discourse. So he's personifying her in the act of listening, her ear actually consuming his stories as if there's some sort of food that she has a lack of satiety in her appetite for his stories. She's not satisfied. She's hungry for more of his war stories. Devouring up his discourse here, there is this sort of de-alliteration that turns up again, but there's something I think that's suggestive about the nature of their relationship in this particular construction here. Devour up my discourse, because she's actually consuming his stories rather than absorbing them. It's not a simple absorption of his stories and a kind of passive acceptance and worship of them. It's actually the consumption of his stories, and because of that, the sort of destruction of them. And that's where we start to see the flaws in their relationship, which emerge more and more as we go through these speeches. And he explains this further here. It took once a pliant hour and found good means to draw from her a prayer of earnest heart. So at this moment, he is talking about having an opportunity to talk to her about his war stories. But pliant, again, is another one of these ambiguous words that can mean, I took once a convenient hour, a convenient time to tell her these stories. But it can also suggest that she was compliant, that she sort of was available to be persuaded by him, and found good means to draw from her a prayer of earnest heart. So in this particular language here, he is the active agent. He draws from her a prayer of earnest heart. He gets out of her some kind of evidence of her virtue. And this is where we see his commitment to abstractions. He draws from her a prayer of earnest heart, that I would all my pilgrimage dilate, that I would tell her more stories. But this prayer of earnest heart is phrasing her attraction to him through this language, this sacrosanct language, as if her attraction to him is spiritually virtuous, because it's not bodily in nature. It's not based on her physical attraction to him. And that prayer of earnest heart is that I would my pilgrimage dilate. So he not only describes her attraction to him and her desire for war stories as a prayer of earnest heart, but actually his war stories themselves become a pilgrimage. They are some sort of kind of sacrosanct religious experience. And so we can see again how this relationship is born of these abstractions. It is created from these verbal constructions that are not based on sexual attraction. You know, they're not talking here about how hot they are and how much they want to sleep with each other. They're talking here about nobility. They're talking here about virtue. They're talking here about all these abstractions that Yago has no time for because he thinks they're basically crap and that they have no value in them because they delude people. A little further down, he says, whereof by parcel she had something heard, but not intentively. I did consent, and often did beguile her of her tears. So again, he uses this language that makes it sound like he's teasing this emotion out of her. He's coaxing emotion out of her like a kind of tempter. And that actually his stories are teasing tears from her like a kind of stolen possession. And so actually some of this language that Brabantio uses to describe him and his fears, in this case, reflect this kind of internalized prejudice, that he has seen his own language that he has used to seduce Desdemona as being something that has resulted in her basically giving up something reluctantly, that she's not actually deeply attracted to him. He beguiles her of her tears. He tricks them out of her with his language. When I did speak of some distressful stroke that my youth suffered, so he tells deliberately kind of pathetic stories, not pathetic in the sense of it being weak and feeble, but of inspiring pathos, inspiring sympathy. My story being done, she gave me for my pains a world of sighs. So this metaphor describing her language and her responses to this captures the sense of empathy that he's able to coax from her. She swore, in faith, 'twas strange, 'twas passing strange, 'twas pitiful, 'twas wondrous pitiful. So again, this language at the beginning, she swore in faith. It immediately pits her as being kind of virtuous. She's using kind of religious invocation to explain her attraction to it. But these repetitions here, 'twas strange, 'twas passing strange, 'twas pitiful, 'twas wondrous pitiful. Those repetitions, I think, suggest her loss of control over her feelings. And what it suggests again is how deeply she's internalized the taboo of racial prejudice. She's almost deliberately trying to not be attracted to him. So her loss of control over her feelings is evident, I think, in these repetitions that she explains when he, well, that he explains when he re-narrates the anecdotes of when they first got together. She can't help but be attracted to him. And this is what she expressly says here. She wished she had not heard it, yet she wished that heaven had made her such a man. She wishes she hadn't heard it because now she's reluctantly attracted to someone who she knows will transgress a social taboo. She knows that she's now attracted to this black guy who she supposedly is not supposed to find attractive. So she wishes she hadn't heard these stories, yet she wished that heaven had made her such a man. So instead of actually finding him attractive, what she admires is his storytelling capacity. And this is important later on in the play because all throughout the play, Othello is paranoid about the fact that Desdemona doesn't find him physically attractive because he's old and he's black. And Iago uses this paranoia to manipulate him all the way through the text. And you can see the beginnings of this in this language here. She wished that she had not heard it yet. She wished that heaven had made her such a man. It sounds like high praise, but it's kind of damning with faint praise. You know, I wish I hadn't heard this wonderful language that's made me fall in love with you. It's not, I find you so deeply sexually attractive, I immediately want to sleep with you. And the difference is important in terms of the way it allows Yago to manipulate him later on in the text. She thanked me and bade me, if I had a friend that loved her, I should but teach him how to tell my story, and that would woo her. So not actually is she bothered by him. You know, she looks for a white alternative. You know, a non-taboo embodiment of Othello's nobility. That's what she's searching for. She's effectively saying, you know, if you've got a white friend who you could show how to speak like this, that would be great, because I'd rather marry him. You know, so there is, right at the beginning, it shows you how deeply he's internalized these prejudices that exist against him. And the fact that their relationship is not based on the whole package. They're attracted to each other's minds, not each other physically. And he says, upon this hint I spake. She loved me for the dangers I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them. Both of them are in love with each other, not because of their bodies and because of their appearances and because of their personalities. She loves me for the dangers I had passed. She's like a kind of giggly schoolgirl that is hearing these kind of stories of great masculine bravado. Yeah, and thinking, hey, this is dangerous. He's a war hero. Isn't this fantastic? And I loved her that she did pity them. It's not actually that he loves her because she shows an interest and a sense of empathy with his war stories. And of course, this is where he ends. This is his great grand speech, and he says, this only is the witchcraft I have used. Here comes the lady, let her witness it. And the great irony here is that this is a type of witchcraft. This great verbal construction that he has put together in these speeches is a form of kind of linguistic power. He's used a linguistic power to seduce her and to gain her attention and her sexual esteem.
That's what the Duke says, right?
Precisely. I think this tale would win my daughter too. Good Brabantio take up this mingled matter at the best. Men do their broken weapons rather used than their bare hands. It's completely seduced the Duke as well. The Duke says, Jesus, you can have my daughter if you talk like that. You know, and he says basically to Brabantio, you better get on with it. Men do their broken weapons rather used than their bare hands. Basically, make your peace with this slightly destroyed state of affairs that you've now got, because his story really convinced me. You know, so we've seen Othello's oratorical power in these lines. Now, what follows from this is a little bit of Desdemona. We do actually get to hear from the woman herself. Here she is. My noble father, I do perceive here a divided duty. Immediately, she borrows the language of hierarchy and abstractions, just like Othello. So we can tell that their language is reflecting the state of their relationship, that it exists in the mind. It is not a relationship based on carnal physical attraction. My noble father, immediately she's adhering to social hierarchy and rank. I do perceive here a divided duty. So this sense of hierarchy that she uses here to explain why she should be allowed to marry Othello is based on a kind of a fairly outward adherence to a patriarchal hierarchy. That I am the woman, I have a duty to you as my father and a duty to my husband, and that it's only right that I respect them. And this is what she says here. To you, I am bound for life and education. My life and education both do learn me how to respect you. So again, her adherence to him is because of abstractions, life and education. They are intellectual constructs. Her adherence is based on kind of cultivated abstractions. My life and education both do learn me how to respect you. These abstractions teach her, through personification in this case, to respect hierarchy. That is what she has learned through her life and her education, is that she is a passive, feeble woman who has to absorb and respect the directives of men. You are the lord of all my duty. I am hitherto your daughter. So the lord of all my duty, this kind of hyperbolic description of his role as her father in this patriarchal social structure. But here's my husband. So her use of these kind of discourse markers here, these conjunctions, but here's my husband, she immediately posits them as opposites, both sources of her loyalty and duty. So she has to pay respect to both of them. And there's nothing that she can do about it. And this is what she does. Her little trick, her little sleight of hand rhetorically is to say, and so much duty as my mother showed to you, preferring you before her father, so much I challenge that I may profess due to the more, my lord. I naturally am now bound in an honour of duty towards Othello in the same way that my mother was to you. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have a wife be respectful and dutiful towards you and then demand exactly the same treatment from your daughter. So here, she reveals this sort of reciprocal nature of patriarchal hierarchy here, and that her own father is trying to kind of use that patriarchal structure to gain himself a wife, but then also to dictate what his daughter can and can't do because of the racial taboo that it violates. Now, there's a little section left. Well, I say little. It's that much. It's a lot. A little further on, Othello talks about his willingness to go to battle. Later on in the scene, they get him to agree to go to battle. The tyrant Custom, most grave senators, hath made the flinty and steel couch of war my thrice-driven bed of down. He again is personifying an abstraction, Custom. The tyrant Custom. Custom here is a bossy dictator that has made this unpleasant bed of custom actually seem comfortable to me because I'm such a badass and I like fighting. That's basically what he's suggesting to us here. Hath made the flinty and steel couch of war my thrice-driven bed of down. A thrice-driven bed of down is an expensive bed. It's a comfy, expensive bed made with goose feathers. So this flinty and steel couch of war, this metaphor for the violence and difficulty of battle, to Othello, someone of such heroic stock as himself, is simply a comfy goose-down bed, because he has been accustomed to these types of suffering. I do agonize a natural and prompt alacrity I find in hardness. So I do actually discover a natural and prompt willingness to take on difficulties, is the language that he's using here.
The couch of war is a metaphor for what?
The couch of war is a metaphor for custom. He is accustomed to lying down on this uncomfortable bed that is war. But it makes it seem like it's a comfortable goose-down one. So he's using the couch of war to explain what it's like to be in battle. It's flinty and made of steel, really, but to him, because he's such a hero, it seems like he's lying on a comfy bed made with goose feathers. And here, I do agonize a natural and prompt alacrity I find in hardness. He's talking about himself, and it's again this rhetorical construction, Iotus, a natural and prompt alacrity. It overstates his commitment to difficulty here. He sounds like he's trying too hard to convince himself and everyone else of his willingness to fight. But this is the nature of his character. He is a soldier and he is a noble one. And he quite readily takes on these difficult situations because he has great confidence in his abilities in war. This present war against the Ottomites, most humbly therefore, bending to your state. And there, quite literally, he is becoming one of these knee-crooking knaves that Yago intensely and sort of with bile criticizes in the opening scene. He is one of these vile, obsequious people that respects hierarchy and orthodoxy. I crave fit disposition for my wife, due reference of place and exhibition with such accommodation and besort as levels with her breeding. He's requesting that Desdemona is able to come with him to Cyprus to fight, but that she is treated according to her rank and place in society. But if you look at all these underlined words, these are all hierarchical abstractions. I crave fit disposition for my wife, treatment according to her rank, reference of place and exhibition that gives due diligence to her rank in society and the way that she appears, with such accommodation and besort as levels with her breeding, with such facilities and kind of seeming situation that matches her status in the social hierarchy. So you have this great wodge of proliferating abstractions in this final selection that shows us that not only is he committed to hierarchy, but that his relationship with Desdemona is based upon this language, that they exist for each other in their own minds. The slightly dodgy, more sexual parts of this are in this final little section that I want to explain. That I did love the more to live with him, my downright violence and storm of fortunes may trumpet to the world. So what she's talking about here is her attraction to Othello. My downright violence and storm of fortunes. This is the way she's describing her luck in falling in love with him, and using this violent metaphor to describe her bad luck in her attraction. It's almost the saying as if she is damned in her attraction to this man, that she can't deal with the fact that she's been unluckily treated by fate. May trumpet to the world, though, what she seems to be saying here is that she is not ashamed of her violation of this taboo. I'm damned because I've fallen in love with a black man, but you can trumpet that to the world. I don't care. I don't care about violating this social norm. Even my heart's subdued, even to the very quality of my lord. I saw Othello's visage in his mind, and to his honours and his valiant parts did I my soul and fortunes consecrate. Now, these, I think, are some of the most important lines in the scene for explaining the nature of their relationship. This is highly ambiguous, this phrase. I saw Othello's visage in his mind. His visage is his outward appearance. So I saw his outward appearance in his mind may mean that she has subsumed his foul and unacceptable physical appearance, the fact that he's black, within this kind of mental construction, that she sort of absorbed the fact of his blackness in the nobility of his mind. But at the same time, it can mean I saw his own means of self-identification. I saw his visage in his mind. I saw the way that he sees himself in his head. So she either is empathizing with the way that he has internalized the social norms of Venice, or trying to claim for her own part a sense of being noble and nobly and virtuously going beyond these social constructions that dictate that she should not be attracted to him. To his honours and his valiant parts did I my soul and fortunes consecrate. And the language of this is incredibly complex. To his honours and his valiant parts. Now, I don't know about you, but that's not necessarily what I would want someone to talk about if they were attracted to me. My honours and my valiant parts. What on earth are they when they're at home? The elements of your character that exemplify bravery and nobility is what she's saying. But I and my soul and fortunes consecrate them. So she makes his nobility sacred with her soul and her money. So she is understanding that she is the catch in this relationship. I consecrate his honours and his valiant parts with my soul and my fortune. I've made him sacred with my white virtuous being and my money. So there is a very deliberate sense of the imbalance in their relationship that comes across in her plea for him. So that, dear lords, if I be left behind a moth of peace, and he go to the war, the rights for which I love him are bereft me, and I a heavy interim shall support by his dear absence. She is saying, please don't let him leave without me. I want to accompany him to Cyprus, because the only way I know how to make sense of my love for him is based on his military conquests. And this is what she means here when she says, I be left behind a moth of peace. I don't find the idea of our relationship attractive in the context of peace. He needs to be a military commander for me to find him sexy. And he to go to the war. The rights for which I love him are bereft of me. And that, again, that phrase there can mean military rituals or, individual freedom. So the rights for which I loved him, it may actually be his specifically militant context that she finds attractive. He is a man in uniform, after all. And that is precisely what she seems to be saying here. The rights for which I love him are bereft of me. If he is fighting while I'm here, a little moth of peace on my own, I don't have my sexy man in uniform around, and I don't know how to find him attractive. And I, a heavy interim, shall support by his dear absence. And she figures his absence as this kind of great weight that she has to bear. I will a heavy interim support by his absence. He uses this as a metaphor for explaining the burden of his absence. And this is the very last little section. And this is where he completely and explicitly explains that their relationship is not based on sex. It is purely a mental construct. Let her have your voice. Vouch with me, heaven. I therefore beg it not to please the palate of my appetite. I want her to come with me, not so that I can fulfill my lusty desire to sleep with her all the time. I want it not to please the palate of my appetite. And he uses this metaphor of food again. You know, she devours his stories, and now he doesn't want to please his appetite by repeatedly having sex with her over and over again. It's not to comply with heat, you know, of bodily lust and desire. It's not because of that I want her to come with me. The young affects in me defunct, and this is the sexual anxiety that Iago cottons onto and exploits. That he's an old, slightly impotent old man, and that Desdemona is not sexually satisfied by him. The young affects in me defunct, and proper satisfaction. So I won't comply with my own bodily desires, because I can't. I don't have them anymore. I can't get it up anymore. I've got no ability to do it. And my own satisfaction, the word proper can mean self-satisfaction. So this relationship is not based on me dragging her over to Cyprus and wanting to sleep with her over and over and over again, but to be free and bounteous to her mind. I mean, this sounds like rubbish, doesn't it? Let's be honest. I want her there so that I can be free and bounteous to her mind, so that we can carry on constructing our relationship from abstract concepts and intellectual communion, but to be free and bounteous to her mind. And heaven defend your good souls, that you think I will your serious and great business scant, for she is with me. Heaven defend you for the accusation that I will somehow not do my duty properly with this woman around me. Of course, I am so noble and virtuous that having a woman beside me is not going to be a distraction, because he's an obsessive, slightly physically distant, obsessive kind of military commander. He doesn't care about sexual pleasure. And this is exactly what he articulates here. No, when light-winged toys of feathered Cupid seal with wanton dullness my speculative and officed instruments, that my disports corrupt and taint my business, let housewives make a skillet of my helm, and all indine and base adversities make head against my estimation. There's a lot in this. Light-winged toys of feathered Cupid. He's talking about, you know, frivolous sexual lust, you know, the desires, and uses a metaphor of the toys of feathered Cupid to say that, you know, these are stupid things. Having your behavior dictated by stupid, lusty bodily desires is a frivolous, light-winged toy of Cupid. With wanton dullness. Now, this to me tells you everything you need to know about Othello. Wanton dullness, I think, is an oxymoron. I don't think wanton behavior is ever associated with being boring. You know, doing things gratuitously and indulgently and impulsively is to Othello dull. He finds it boring because it's not based on nobility and hierarchy and military commitment. When they seal with wanton dullness my speculative and officed instruments, he's talking about his brain. And this is a really weird way of describing his brain. Speculative and officed instruments. So his instrument that he uses to speculate and work out the future, and that something that is precisely the reason for its existence is that he is officed, he has a job and is committed to society. So what this tells us is that his brain is more important than his sexual desire, and that he gains his sense of social value from his commitment to the nation. His officed instrument, my brain, the thing that I use to serve Venice, is going to be tainted in some way by my sexual desire for this woman. And this is precisely what he's saying. This will not happen. It's not possible, partly because I couldn't even if I wanted to. And he says, let housewives make a skillet of my helmet. Let domestic women turn my military helmet into a little grill for cooking meat. So these become metonyms. The skillet of my helm. He means his helmet. So he here is saying to them, if I do this, let domestic old women take my helmet and use it to cook meat on. I.e., take my military prowess and my standing and domesticate it. Make me a feeble little house pet, because I will not allow this sexual desire to impede my ability to, in some way, govern and be a military commander.
Is Desdemona attractive?
Yeah, the implication in the story is that she's extremely physically attractive and rich and virtuous.
Did Viagra exist?
No. And let's end it here.